Imagine sitting down and looking at a 900-page textbook, like for the very first time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, thank you.
Right. And it's organic chemistry.
Yeah.
And you have, I mean, exactly 48 hours until the final exam.
That is, I mean, that's an actual nightmare scenario. That triggers a full-blown panic attack just thinking about it.
Exactly. Your heart is racing, your palms are sweating, and your brain, well, it basically just entirely shuts down.
Yeah, you go into total survival mode.
But today, for this dump dive, we're looking at someone who faced that exact terrifying scenario. And he skipped the panic completely. And he passed.
Which is insane. And he didn't do it with, some Silicon Valley smart drug or a new Focus app on his phone.
No, not at all. He did it, using a physical and mental practice that is literally thousands of years old.
And that completely upends our whole modern understanding of how we're supposed to handle stress, like cognitive load.
Yeah, because we're so used to thinking of focus as, like, a software problem.
Right, something you fix by downloading a productivity app or blocking social media websites.
But the story we are unpacking today, it suggests it's fundamentally a hardware issue. It's about how your nervous system actually processes reality under immense pressure.
Absolutely.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking into the life, the practices, and basically the whole philosophy of a man named Osman. He's known as the blind Muslim yogi.
And Osman has just a fascinating background. I mean, he's a master-level bioenergy healer, an entrepreneur, and obviously a yoga and meditation teacher.
He's been doing this for like 50 years. And what makes his perspective so compelling for us is how he takes these incredibly ancient sciences and applies them directly to the hypermodern problems you and I struggle with.
Exactly. I'm talking about, memory degradation, extreme academic pressure, and just that universal feeling of having a totally scattered brain.
Yeah, that 100 tabs open in your head feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of how he does this, it's really crucial to lay down a foundational disclaimer.
Right, because Osman himself is very, very upfront about this. He explicitly states that his natural therapies, his yoga and meditation, they are absolutely not a replacement for qualified medical treatment.
Yeah, if you have a serious medical condition, you go to a medical professional. Full stop.
Precisely.
Yeah.
He offers these as complementary services. And I think highlighting that is super important because, well, it establishes Osman as a highly practical, responsible voice.
Right, in a wellness space that can sometimes be, let's be honest, filled with some pretty exaggerated claims.
Yeah, he isn't out there telling people that breathing exercises are going to cure a compound fracture.
No, he's talking about optimizing the biological machinery of your mind so that you can navigate life's challenges with a radically different baseline of functioning.
Exactly.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to really track Osman's journey. We want to understand how his specific approach to yoga rewires biological memory.
And we're going to trace this chronologically. So, starting with how he says we should introduce this to kids, then moving into the extreme crucible of his university days.
And finally looking at how he applies it to the really intense, high-stakes reality of his adult life right now.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's play with childhood. Because Osman has a very strong critique of how modern society tries to teach kids to focus. He basically completely debunks this idea of the mini monk.
Oh, it is a brilliant critique. And it strikes right at the heart of a major flaw in how developmental psychology is applied in schools today.
Yeah, the whole mindfulness for kids trend.
Right. I mean, right now, the standard operating procedure is to take a group of really restless 8 to 16-year-olds, sit them cross-legged on a floor, tell them to close their eyes, and just focus on their breath.
I've actually seen it happen in classrooms. It is agonizing to watch.
He really is.
The kids are just vibrating with this pent-up energy. They're squirming, they're stressed out by the silence, they're like peeking to see if anyone else is looking.
And ultimately, everyone, the kids and the teachers, leaves the room feeling like they've somehow failed at being mindful.
Because they're fighting basic human biology.
Exactly. Osman argues that traditional silent sitting meditation is fundamentally unsuitable for young children and teenagers in that specific 8 to 16 age bracket.
It just doesn't work for them.
Right. Because if you step back and look at the neurobiology, children are highly kinetic. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles impulse control and quiet focus, is literally years away from being fully developed.
So expecting them to use top-down cognitive control to just force their bodies to be still, it's just an unrealistic expectation.
It's completely backward.
So if sitting still is totally off the table, what is Osman's alternative?
Hmm.
Because kids obviously still need to learn how to focus.
Well, what's fascinating here is that Osman advocates for what we would call bottom-up processing. Instead of using the mind to quiet the body, you use the body to quiet the mind.
Okay, so physical movement.
Yes. He argues that children should be engaging in physical yoga postures, dynamic movement, and even martial arts. The physical exertion itself becomes the vehicle for the meditation.
And he actually shares his own history with this. He started a consistent physical practice when he was around 9 or 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But what really stood out to me wasn't just that he did yoga, it was the frequency. He wasn't meditating on a mountaintop every single day. He was doing this like 2 to 3 times a week.
Right. He mentions going to a yoga class maybe once a week, practicing at home occasionally, and doing martial arts like karate twice a week.
And that frequency is a subtle but really vital point.
It is, because by practicing 2 or 3 times a week, he totally removed the pressure of absolute perfection or monastic dedication. You don't have to be a monk to get the benefits.
Right. But to understand why this physical movement works so much better than silent meditation for a kid's developing brain, we have to look at how the nervous system learns.
Exactly. Think about a 10-year-old trying to hold a complex yoga posture or executing a karate sequence. They are learning proprioception. They have to be hyper aware of where their limbs are in space.
And they have to synchronize their breathing with that physical exertion just to, maintain their balance.
Yeah, so they literally do not have the mental bandwidth to be distracted by anything else.
Their working memory is entirely consumed by the physical demands of that exact present moment.
Right, they are meditating, but they're doing it through gross motor skills. By engaging the body so intensely, they burn off that excess kinetic energy.
So the brain doesn't have to spend precious resources trying to suppress the urge to move.
Exactly.
It makes total sense. I mean, think about trying to force a 10-year-old to sit in silent meditation. It's like trying to put a tight lid on a boiling pot of water.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, you can't just clamp the lid down tighter and command the steam to stop existing. Eventually, the pressure gets to be too much and it just blows.
And that's a classroom meltdown.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Osman is saying you don't trap the steam. You use the yoga postures as an engine to channel that energy. You're forcing it through a specific mechanical pathway to generate focused, usable power.
And by running that engine 2 or 3 times a week over several years, you are slowly altering the baseline wiring of the autonomic nervous system.
You're actually changing the hardware.
Yes. The child is learning, on a cellular level, how to transition from a state of intense physical exertion into a state of deep, controlled rest. They're strengthening the vagus nerve.
So they're building the physiological infrastructure that will eventually allow them to sit still and do the deeper mental work when they're older.
Precisely. They're building the vessel first.
Okay, so we see how this physical practice builds a solid foundation, preventing a kid from basically bouncing off the walls. But preventing distraction is one thing.
Right.
How does this translate into high-level cognitive performance? Because Osman didn't just become a calm teenager. He experienced what looks like a total academic metamorphosis.
Yeah, the long-term cognitive payoff is where the evidence just becomes undeniable. I mean, Osman shares that in his early schooling, he was actually in the bottom 10% of his class.
Which is that exact zone where kids start to self-identify as not smart and just completely check out of the whole educational system.
Totally. But as his nervous system matured alongside this consistent yoga practice, his capacity just expanded dramatically. He moved into the top 10 or 5% in high school.
And eventually reached the top 1% during his university years. But the defining moment, the real proof of concept for his method, was that massive chemistry final we talked about in the intro.
Yes. The 900-page nightmare.
Let's dig into the actual mechanics of how he survived this, because the context makes it sound literally impossible. He had deliberately skipped an entire year's worth of lectures for this chemistry class.
And honestly, his reasoning is something any college student can relate to.
Oh, for sure. He realized the professor was just literally copying the textbook onto the chalkboard, word for word.
Yeah, so Osman made a calculated decision. He figured his time was better spent living his life, playing sports, relaxing, rather than sitting in a lecture hall doing rote transcription.
Very rational decision in theory. But it led to a terrifying reality. 2 days before the final exam, he has to face the consequences.
He opens the material for the very first time.
Right, an 800-page main textbook. plus 100 pages of typed notes specifically on organic chemistry.
And organic chemistry is notorious. It's not a narrative you can just read and absorb. It's entirely comprised of illogical, rote memorization formulas, laws, definitions.
He initially decided to just skip the exam and take the failure. Like, why even bother? But with 48 hours left, he decided to just give it a bash. And he passed.
Which is staggering.
Right. So what is biologically happening here that prevents him from just staring blankly at page 1 for 12 hours?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand how he passed, we have to look at what happens to a normal student in that scenario. When you realize you have 900 pages to memorize in 48 hours, your amygdala, which the brain's threat detection center, perceives that as a literal survival threat.
It doesn't know the difference between failing a test and being chased by a lion.
Exactly. It triggers the HPA axis, flooding your entire system with cortisol and adrenaline.
The classic fight, flight, or freeze response.
And in academic settings, it's almost always freeze. And here's the critical mechanism. When your brain is flooded with cortisol, your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles logic and working memory, is essentially bypassed.
So it's a physiological hijack.
Completely. The amygdala hijacks the system. Your working memory gets wiped clean because your brain is preparing your body to run away. That is why a panicked student can read the exact same paragraph 14 times and not comprehend a single word.
Oh man, I've been there.
We all have. The biological machinery required for encoding memory is literally offline.
So traditional cramming, fueled by anxiety, is basically trying to load software onto a computer while simultaneously hitting the power button over and over again.
That is a perfect way to describe it. The system is crashing while you are trying to use it. But Osman bypassed that entire physiological cascade.
And it's important to note, this isn't a story about him possessing some magical photographic memory.
No, he explicitly denies having a photographic memory. He hasn't memorized libraries of books. What he possessed was the profound, hard-won ability to completely suppress the panic response.
Because he had spent a decade training his vagus nerve through yoga.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of his baseline nervous system regulation, he could sit down in front of that massive textbook and keep his parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state, dominant.
Right.
And when you are in a parasympathetic state, your hippocampus, which is the brain structure responsible for memory consolidation, it operates at absolute maximum efficiency.
The prefrontal cortex stays fully online.
Exactly. He didn't have to spend 80% of his metabolic energy fighting his own anxiety. He could dedicate 100% of his cognitive resources purely to encoding the information.
It's like, imagine your working memory is a physical workbench in your garage. Most students walking into a 48-hour cram session have a workbench that is completely covered in junk mail.
Junk mail being their past regrets about skipping class.
That's right. And unopened, terrifying bills, which are their anxieties about failing and ruining their future. There is absolutely no physical space left on the workbench to actually lay out the chemistry formulas and build the memory.
I love that analogy.
So what Osman did through his breathing and physical conditioning was basically activate an automated conveyor belt that instantly swept all the junk mail and all the bills off the table.
His workbench was entirely clear, totally empty, and waiting for the data.
And because it was perfectly clear, he maintained this highly concentrated, relaxed, directed attention. He wasn't relying on traditional academic brilliance. It was supreme cognitive efficiency. He was in total absorption mode.
And that's why he passed. Not because he was a genius, but because he was profoundly relaxed.
Okay, so we see how yoga stops panic during chemistry exam. That's incredible. But exams are, at the end of the day, controlled environments.
Sure, the test is printed, the clock is set, the parameters are known.
Right. What happens when the variables are completely unpredictable? What happens when they're changing by the second, and real money, like your real livelihood, is on the line?
Yeah, that's a whole different level of stress.
And even more profoundly, what happens when you lose the very physical sense that most of us rely on to track those variables?
This is where Osman's story transitions from a really impressive academic anecdote into something truly extraordinary regarding human adaptation.
Yeah, let's jump to his adult life.
Yeah.
Because Osman is an entrepreneur, and he's deeply involved in online day trading.
And day trading is notoriously volatile. You're tracking multiple assets, margins, profit percentages, shifting daily gains. I mean, it requires immense computational speed.
And Osman tracks all of this complex arithmetic entirely in his head. He doesn't write it down. He says he processes it faster than a standard calculator.
He monitors these trades a minimum of twice a day, constantly updating his mental ledger with exact dollar amounts and percentages, comparing them against moving starting balances.
But the detail that completely reorients this entire conversation, and we really need to emphasize this, is that Osman is now permanently blind.
Right. He
Oh.
lost his sight entirely in May of 2023. So when he talks about these visual concepts in his work, it's because he had normal eyesight for the vast majority of his life up until recently.
And because he is blind, he can't just punch numbers into a standard desktop calculator to check his margins. He has to rely entirely on his internal cognition.
He mentions that he rarely even uses voice assistants for math. He might ask Siri to do a calculation for him maybe once every 6 months.
Which is mind-blowing. To understand the magnitude of this, we need to differentiate between the type of memory he used for the chemistry exam and the type he uses for day trading, right?
Yes, exactly. The organic chemistry was long-term memory retrieval and coding static facts to be recalled later. Day trading requires working memory, specifically computational working memory.
Right.
It's the ability to hold multiple fluid changing variables in your mind simultaneously, manipulate them, and arrive at a logical conclusion without losing track of the original inputs.
It is extreme mental juggling. But here's the thing. Most of us rely heavily on our external vision to aid our working memory. We don't even realize we're doing it.
It's all constantly.
If you have to multiply a few numbers, you write them down on a scrap of paper so you don't have to hold them in your head.
Right.
You look at a spreadsheet. Your eyes act as an external hard drive.
Right. And psychologists refer to this as the visuospatial sketchpad. It's a core component of working memory. For sighted people, it's augmented by the physical environment.
But for Osman, when that external vision is removed, his internal working memory has to bear the entire load. His internal sketchpad has to be immensely vast and incredibly stable.
And he attributes his ability to maintain this massive internal architecture directly to his advanced meditation and yoga practice.
Because without sight, it would be so easy for the mind to just become a chaotic swirl of numbers and anxiety.
Exactly. Meditation has given him the ability to compartmentalize. He's cultivated an internal sanctuary. Even without physical sight, his mind's eye is brilliantly illuminated and highly organized.
He doesn't get lost in the noise of a fluctuating market because his baseline state is profound mental stillness.
And this lack of emotional reactivity, this cognitive endurance, allows him to make highly analytical, profitable investment decisions that just aren't clouded by fatigue or panic.
I really want to pause here because this level of self-reliance is almost alien in today's society.
Really is.
Think about it. If I have to figure out a 20% tip on a restaurant bill, I instantly reach for the calculator app on my phone. We all do.
We outsource even the most basic arithmetic to silicon.
Well, Osman is operating entirely on biological processing power, and that stark contrast brings us directly to Osman's very sharp critique of how the rest of us are living. We need to dive into this crisis of digital amnesia.
Osman is essentially holding up a mirror to modern society, and what he sees is a population experiencing rapid cognitive atrophy. He points out a reality that is both absurd and terrifying. The average person today does not even know their own phone number. If you ask someone for their number, they'll almost always say, "Hold on, let me just text you my contact card."
They literally cannot verbally recite the digits.
Right.
And he paints this incredibly visceral scenario. Imagine you are in a foreign country. You're walking down the street and your phone is stolen. Or you just leave it in a taxi. Along with that phone goes your digital wallet, your maps, and all your contacts.
20 years ago, losing a phone or a wallet abroad was a massive stressful inconvenience. But you'd find a payphone, call your partner whose number you knew by heart, and start canceling cards.
You could function.
Yes. Today, losing your phone in a foreign country is total incapacitation.
You are completely helpless. You cannot call your spouse. You cannot call your parents. You cannot call your best friend because you do not know their numbers.
Your entire support network, your entire identity is locked inside a piece of glass that is now miles away.
Osman compares this to his own mind. He talks about needing a specific membership number that he hadn't used in like 5 years. It was a 13 or 15-digit number. He just went inward, accessed the file in his mind, and pulled it up in a split second.
The mechanism behind our helplessness is something cognitive psychologists call cognitive offloading.
Right.
We have decided that our phones are better, more reliable hard drives than our brains, so we offload the work of remembering.
But memory is not a static storage bin. It's a biological muscle.
Exactly. It requires resistance and use to maintain its structural integrity. By constantly outsourcing our recall, we are inducing digital amnesia. The neural pathways responsible for encoding and retrieving information are physically weakening through sheer lack of use.
And it isn't just about long strings of numbers. Osman shares this wildly revealing anecdote from an Islamic YouTube show.
Oh, this story is crazy.
He was on a live broadcast, and a viewer called in. The host of the show casually asked the caller, "What did you have for iftar?" Now, iftar is the meal that breaks the daily fast. The caller paused, stumbled, and finally admitted,
Which is staggering when you consider the context. Breaking a fast is not a mindless snacking session. It's a highly intentional, significant ritual. And Osman points out that this meal was likely consumed only an hour or two prior to the phone call.
the memory of a significant ritualistic meal completely evaporated from a person's brain in under 120 minutes.
That is the micro-level symptom of a very dangerous macro-level disease.
Yeah.
Osman connects this inability to remember a recent meal directly to people's inability to execute their lives. He lays it out progressively. First, you forget what you ate. Then you forget your daily tasks.
Then you lose track of your 7-day goals, your 7-week goals.
And eventually, the overarching goals of your entire life. He explicitly states that this is why so many people are stagnating. They literally cannot remember what they are striving for.
Okay, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate for a second, because I know exactly what the defense of this behavior is. The whole concept of extended cognition argues that our smartphones are literally evolutionary extensions of our brains.
Yeah.
So why is cognitive offloading inherently bad?
Right, the Silicon Valley argument.
Yeah. If iCloud has a 100% perfect recall rate for my 13-digit membership number, why should I clutter my biological working memory with it? Shouldn't I outsource the boring rote memorization to my phone so that I can free up my biological brain power for higher-level thinking, creativity, and complex problem solving?
It sounds incredibly logical, outsource the mundane to elevate the profound. But Osman's philosophy, supported by what we are actually observing in society, suggests the exact opposite is occurring.
We aren't becoming geniuses just because we don't memorize phone numbers anymore.
Right. We are not replacing rote memory with higher-level creative thinking. We are replacing it with more scrolling, more distraction, and more cognitive fragmentation.
It's not like the guy who forgot his iftar meal was spending that hour formulating a unified theory of quantum mechanics in his head. He was probably just doom scrolling on a second screen while he ate.
Exactly. The argument for extended cognition falls apart because it misunderstands the fundamental nature of memory. Osman isn't saying that knowing a 13-digit number is morally superior or practically necessary in itself.
Right.
He is arguing that the act of remembering preserves the capacity to remember.
It's like saying, why should I bother doing squats or deadlifts at the gym when I own a car and a forklift? I don't need to carry heavy things in my modern life.
That's spot on.
You don't do deadlifts because you plan on carrying a refrigerator down the street.
Yeah.
You do them to maintain the bone density, the structural integrity, and the baseline health of your physical body so that it doesn't just collapse under its own weight as you age.
That is the precise mechanism. Memorizing phone numbers, tracking a mental ledger of trades without a calculator, deliberately staying present enough to encode the sensory details of a meal, these are mental deadlifts.
I love that. Mental deadlifts.
They force neurogenesis, they keep the hippocampus robust. If you abandon the mental deadlifts because the smartphone can do the heavy lifting, your biological infrastructure collapses.
And when it collapses, you lose your ability to sustain attention on anything, including your 7-year life goals.
It really boils down to personal sovereignty. If your entire life, your contacts, your schedule, your math, your memories, is hosted on an external server, you are not an independent entity.
You're just a biological appendage to a digital machine.
Exactly. Osman, who has lost the external data-gathering tool of his eyesight, intimately understands that true sovereignty requires an independent, self-reliant mind.
But this pursuit of total mental sovereignty, this level of intense focus where you pass chemistry exams on 2 days of study and calculate day trades in the dark, I mean, it can sound incredibly intimidating to the average person.
Actually, it sounds exhausting, honestly.
Right. I can hear people listening to this and thinking, if I start committing to this level of yoga and meditation, is it going to fundamentally change my personality?
Am I going to become a robot?
Yeah. Am I going to become this hyper-optimized, stoic, humorless academic machine who just walks around doing math all day?
That is a very, very common fear. The apprehension that meditation strips away the color of your personality and turns you into an ascetic monk. But Osman actually anticipates this exact fear.
And he addresses it brilliantly by introducing the story of his brother.
Yes, the brother is the perfect counterweight to Osman's intensity. Let's look at this anti-nerd effect.
Because Osman shares that his brother grew up practicing the exact same physical yoga postures alongside him. They did the routines together in their youth.
Mm-hmm.
But their personalities couldn't have been more different. Osman was clearly driven. He was pushing himself to the top 1% of his university.
And his brother, on the other hand, actively hated studying. He was not an academic by any stretch of the imagination.
Osman describes him as highly sociable, someone who just wanted to hang out and enjoy his youth. He had absolutely zero interest in academic prestige.
It was so bad that their family was highly apprehensive about his future. They fully expected him to fail high school and drop out. They didn't think he had the discipline to even graduate.
But then, the final results come in. And to the absolute shock of everyone in the family, the brother passes. He graduates. And the kicker is, he did it without actually sitting down to study.
And Osman attributes this unexpected success entirely to the underlying neurological benefits of the yoga practice they shared.
Okay, I have to push back here, because this sounds suspiciously like magic. You cannot just passively absorb advanced calculus or history dates through osmosis simply because you did a downward dog twice a week.
Right. It sounds too good to be true.
What is actually happening in his brother's brain that allows him to pass high school without opening a book?
Well, it isn't magic. It is the concept of a hardware optimizer. To understand how the brother passed, we have to look at cognitive load and passive encoding.
Okay, break that down for me.
Most high school students who are highly sociable and hate studying spend their entire time in the classroom either highly distracted, actively resisting the teacher, or stressed about social dynamics.
Right, who's dating who, what's happening after school.
Exactly. Their working memory is full of social anxiety, so nothing the teacher says actually encodes into long-term memory.
Going back to our analogy, their mental workbench is completely cluttered with social junk mail.
Precisely. But because the brother had been practicing yoga, his baseline nervous system was regulated. Even though he didn't care about the academic material, his autonomic nervous system wasn't in a state of resistance or chaotic distraction.
His mind was relatively still.
Yes. Therefore, just by physically sitting in the classroom and casually listening, his brain was operating efficiently enough in the background to capture and encode the minimum necessary information.
Oh, wow. So he didn't have to grind because his resting state of absorption was so much higher than the average stressed-out teenager.
Exactly. It gave him the minimum effective dose of academic retention. It frames yoga not as a personality rewriter, but purely as an optimizer of your existing intent.
It doesn't implant new desires.
No, the brother didn't suddenly desire to be a valedictorian. He just wanted to hang out with his friends. The yoga simply maximized his natural hardware so he could absorb just enough information to pass.
Keeping the family off his back and allowing him to continue being his highly sociable self without the stress of failing.
That drastically lowers the barrier to entry for anyone listening.
It really does. You don't have to want to be a high-stakes, blind day trader doing complex percentages in your head. You don't have to want to conquer organic chemistry.
Right. Maybe you just want to be a relaxed, sociable person who casually succeeds at your middle management job without burning out.
Maybe you just want to go to a dinner party, have a great conversation, and actually be able to remember the name of the person you spoke to 2 hours later.
Osman is demonstrating that the tool serves the user's intent. It does not dictate the intent.
He used the expanded cognitive capacity to achieve extreme academic and entrepreneurial success. His brother used the exact same expanded capacity to skate by with zero stress and have a great time.
The practice simply removes the physiological friction from whatever it is you choose to do.
The tool serves the user's intent. That is the perfect encapsulation of this entire philosophy. We've covered an immense amount of ground today, and I think it is worth tracing the path we just walked to fully appreciate the scope of what Osman is offering.
We began by redefining how we build the foundation of focus in children, moving away from the unrealistic expectation of silent sitting.
And instead recognizing that dynamic physical movement bottom-up processing is the crucial first step to training the nervous system.
Then we looked at how that trained nervous system performed under the ultimate modern pressure test, the chemistry exam.
We explored the neurobiology of cramming and how bypassing the amygdala's panic response allowed Osman's working memory to remain a completely clear workbench, ready to absorb an impossible amount of data.
From there, we examined the extreme resilience of this practice in his adult life. We saw how the loss of external physical sight didn't diminish his capacity.
Rather, it proved how a meticulously cultivated internal working memory can act as a sanctuary, allowing him to perform complex mental arithmetic and day trading without relying on external silicon.
Which naturally brought us to confront our own fragility, the epidemic of digital amnesia.
The terrifying realization that by completely outsourcing our memory to smartphones, we are allowing the biological infrastructure of our brains to atrophy, leading to a state where we can't remember a meal we just ate, let alone the goals for our own lives.
And finally, we dismantled the intimidation factor. We used the story of his socially driven brother to prove that this isn't about becoming a monk.
It is simply a hardware optimization that allows you to be a more effective, less stressed version of exactly who you already are.
It is a profound shift in perspective. It tells us that we are not broken, we are just unmaintained.
For anyone listening who is eager to stop the cognitive atrophy and actually start rebuilding that internal capacity, Osman offers extensive resources.
He really does. He has modern discussions rooted in these ancient sciences, directly tackling the kinds of trending, high-stress topics we discussed today.
And you can explore his approach and access his insights, including a free 5-minute yoga and meditation program available for download over at his website. That is yogawellness786.com. I highly recommend diving in and seeing how it applies to your own specific intent.
As we bring this to a close, I want to leave everyone with a final, somewhat provocative thought regarding where we direct our energy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Consider the sheer amount of time, financial resources, and emotional obsession we pour into maintaining our external technology. We stand in lines for the latest smartphones.
Oh, absolutely.
We constantly clear caches, upgrade RAM, and install software updates just to ensure our devices run a fraction of a second faster and don't crash when we have too many browser windows open.
We definitely treat our phones better than our own nervous systems.
We absolutely do, but consider this. What if the most sophisticated, profoundly powerful piece of technology you will ever have access to is currently sitting right behind your eyes?
Wow.
And what if right now it is sluggish, overwhelmed, and experiencing critical failures simply because it is waiting for you to run the ancient biological maintenance update it was originally designed for?
An update that doesn't require a download, a subscription, or a silicon chip. It just requires a little bit of physical movement, conscious breath, and a willingness to clear the workbench.
Exactly.
That is something to seriously think about the next time you instinctively reach for your phone to do simple math. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.